Clara Brennan was digging in frozen ground when the stranger came, not for planting. For remembering, her mother's grave needed flowers before winter swallowed everything. Before the bank took their cabin. Before her father's lungs finally surrendered to the silica dust that had been killing him for years. Before her 13-year-old sister and 11-year-old brother were scattered to orphanages across Colorado territory like seeds the wind had no use for, 36 hours. That's all she had left. The dirt beneath her hands was hard, unforgiving. Like everything else in Silver Creek, the dying mining town where hope had gone to rot alongside abandoned equipment and broken dreams. She pressed a handful of dried wildflowers into the earth, whispering words her mother would never hear. "I don't know how to do this, Mama. I don't know how to keep them together." That's when she heard the horse. Clara looked up to see a man riding through the November mist, his silhouette cutting through the gray like a question mark. Dark coat, weathered face, eyes the color of slate. He didn't hurry. Most men who came to their cabin carried urgency in their shoulders. Creditors, lawyers, men with papers that meant the end of everything. This one rode as if time bent around him instead of crushing him. He stopped at the cemetery gate. Looked at her kneeling in the dirt. And said 5 words that would change everything. "I need a wife, Miss Brennan. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop a comment below. Tell me, would you have said yes to a stranger offering salvation? Would you have climbed into his wagon, knowing it could be rescue or ruin, and let him carry you into mountains that might never let you leave?" This is Clara's story. And before it ends, you'll understand why some valleys keep their secrets buried deep, why some marriages start with lies and end with truth, and why the strongest love is the one that survives winter. Hit that subscribe button. Because you won't want to miss a moment of this. Let's begin. The October wind carried the smell of snow down from the high peaks. And Clara Brennan knew they were running out of time. She worked the garden plot behind the cabin with methodical determination, her skirt dark with mud, her hands raw despite the worn gloves she'd patched 4 times over. The soil here was thin, rocky, grudging. But she coaxed what she could from it: carrots no thicker than her thumb, potatoes small and knobbed, late squash that might, if she was lucky, hold through November. Behind her, the cabin leaned slightly east where the foundation had settled. Her father had built it 17 years ago when the mining camp at Silver Creek still promised fortune. Now the camp was collapsed structures and rusted equipment. And her father was dying by inches in the room where he'd once planned a prosperous future. "Clara," her sister Rose's voice carried from the doorway, high and worried. "Papa's coughing again." "Bad." Clara straightened, pressing one muddy hand to the small of her back. She was 24, but some mornings she felt ancient. "Get him water. The boiled kind, not from the pump. We're almost out of wood for boiling, then use what's left. I'll split more before supper." Rose hesitated in the doorway, 13 years old and already wearing the pinched look of someone who'd learned to expect disappointment. Her dark hair, so like their mother's, hung in a braid over one shoulder. "There's a man coming up the road." "Horse and wagon." Clara's stomach clenched. "How's he dressed?" "Can't tell yet. Dark coat. Go inside. Stay with Papa and Danny. Don't come out unless I call you." She didn't wait to see if Rose obeyed. She crossed the yard in quick strides, pulling off her gloves, smoothing her apron more from habit than hope that it would help her appearance. Creditors had come in suits, in work clothes, in sheriff's badges. They all wanted the same thing: payment her father couldn't give, secured against land he'd already mortgaged past its value. The rider crested the low rise where the road bent toward their property. Even at a distance, Clara could see he sat his horse with unconscious grace, someone who'd spent more of his life in the saddle than out of it. The wagon behind was plain but sturdy, covered with canvas lashed tight against weather. He didn't hurry. That was the first thing she noticed. Most men who came here carried urgency in their shoulders, in the set of their jaws. This man rode as if time bent around him instead of pressing at his back. When he reached the yard, he stopped the team with a quiet word and climbed down. Tall. lean in the way of men who worked hard and ate plain. His coat was worn but well-made, his hat shadowing a face weathered by sun and wind. Dark beard neatly trimmed. Eyes the color of slate, Miss Brennan, his voice was low, rough-edged. Not a question, yes, Clara stayed where she was, keeping the garden plot between them. If you're here about the bank loans, my father's lawyer, I'm not from the bank, she waited. Experience had taught her that silence was often the best defense. He looked at her for a long moment, those gray eyes steady and unreadable. Named Samuel Ashford. I work cattle in the high country. Run fence lines, break horses, hire on where the work needs doing. He paused. I'm looking for a wife. Of all the things Clara had braced herself to hear, that hadn't been among them. I beg your pardon, a wife, he repeated, matter of fact, as if he'd said he was looking for a good saddle or a winter coat. Heard in town your family's in a hard spot. Heard you're a woman who works and doesn't complain. Heard you've kept your father and your siblings together when most would have given up. He shifted his weight, and she caught a glimpse of a rifle in his saddle scabbard. Well kept, I've got steady work. A place to live. Money enough to settle debts if they're not too deep. Clara felt as if the ground had tilted beneath her feet. You don't know me, don't need to know more than I've heard. He pulled off his hat, holding it in both hands. His hair was dark, touched with gray at the temples. Older than her by perhaps 10 years, I'm not offering romance, Miss Brennan. I'm offering practicality. You need help. I need a partner. Seems to me we might suit each other's purposes. That's insane, maybe, his expression didn't change, but you've got creditors coming, don't you? And winter behind them. And a sick father who can't work. And 2 children who need feeding. He gestured toward the cabin, the sagging roof, the garden she'd been working. This place won't hold. You know it. I know it. Question is whether you're willing to consider an alternative. Clara's hands clenched at her sides. You come here, a complete stranger, and expect me to just, what? Climb into your wagon and ride off to God knows where, not expecting anything. Offering, Samuel Ashford settled his hat back on his head. I'll be at the Silver Creek boarding house through Sunday. You want to talk terms, you know where to find me. You want me to ride on and forget I came here, I'll do that too. He turned toward his wagon. Wait, the word came out before Clara could stop it. What debts are we talking about? How much? He looked back at her. How much do you owe? She shouldn't tell him. Shouldn't reveal the depth of their desperation to a stranger. But something in his face, the weathered patience, the lack of judgment, made her answer honestly, $1,800 to the bank. Another $400 in medical bills and town credit. The lawyer wants $300 more, but he hasn't been paid yet. Samuel Ashford nodded slowly. I can cover the bank and the medical. The lawyer can wait or work for payment in goods. That sound fair? Why? Clara heard the shake in her own voice. Why would you do that for people you've never met? Because I need a wife who won't run when things get hard. Because I've worked alone long enough and I'm tired of it. Because you've got courage and capability, and those matter more to me than a pretty face or a dowry. He gathered his reins. Think on it, Miss Brennan. You've got until Sunday. He climbed into the wagon and turned the team with practiced ease. Clara stood in the muddy garden and watched him ride back down the road, disappearing into the autumn haze that hung over the foothills like held breath. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. Clara, who was that? Rose's voice. Small. Frightened, Clara didn't turn around. Trouble, she said quietly. Or salvation. I'm not sure which. That night, Patrick Brennan's coughing woke the whole house. Clara rose in the dark and went to his room, carrying the lamp they could barely afford to keep filled with oil. Her father sat propped against pillows she'd sewn from flour sacks, his chest rattling with each breath. At 49, he looked 70. The mines had destroyed him from the inside out, silica dust coating his lungs, turning each breath into broken glass. Easy, Papa. She poured water from the pitcher, held the cup to his lips. Small sips, He drank, then fell back, exhausted from the effort. In the lamplight, his face was gray, sheened with sweat. The bank, he managed. Letter came. Tuesday, I know. Don't worry about it tonight. Can't pay. His eyes, once sharp and bright with ambition, were clouded now with pain and resignation. Can't protect you. Hush. She took his hand, careful of the joints swollen with arthritis. You've protected us plenty. Rest now. But he gripped her fingers with surprising strength. Rose. Danny. Promise me. Promise you won't let them be separated. Promise you'll keep them together. Whatever it takes. Clara felt her throat close. I promise. He relaxed then, drifting back toward sleep. She stayed until his breathing settled into its labored rhythm, then carried the lamp back to the main room where she'd made her own bed on the floor near the stove. Rose and Danny shared the loft. Her sister curled small beneath a patchwork quilt. Her brother sprawled in the careless abandon of 11-year-old sleep. Whatever it takes. Clara sat on her bedroll and pulled the bank letter from beneath her pillow. She'd read it so many times the paper had worn soft at the creases. The words never changed. Final notice. Payment in full required by November 1st. Failure to comply will result in seizure of property and assets. Minors in residence will be remanded to territorial care pending suitable placement. Territorial care, the words were clinical. Bureaucratic. They meant orphanages. Workhouses. Rose sent to one place, Danny to another, separated by miles and paperwork and the grinding indifference of institutions that process children like cattle. Clara folded the letter and pressed it against her chest. In 36 hours, the bank would come. In 36 hours, everything would end, unless, she thought of Samuel Ashford's offer. The quiet certainty in his voice. The worn but capable look of his hands, his horse, his wagon. A man who worked in the high country. Who hired on where work needed doing. Who needed a wife and had money enough to settle debts. It was insane. It was desperate. It was a gamble that could end in disaster. But it was a chance. Clara lay down on her bedroll and stared at the ceiling beams her father had hewn and fitted 17 years ago, when hope still lived in this house. She listened to Rose's soft breathing, Danny's occasional sleep murmur, her father's ruined lungs struggling in the next room. Whatever it takes. By the time dawn grayed the windows, she'd made her decision. The Silver Creek boarding house sat on the edge of what remained of the old mining camp. Half the buildings had been abandoned, their windows empty as skull sockets. But the boarding house survived on traffic from ranch hands and seasonal workers passing through on their way to higher or lower ground. Clara walked the 3 miles into town in the early morning cold, her second-best dress under her coat, her hair pinned as neatly as she could manage without a proper mirror. She'd told Rose she was going to speak with the lawyer. Rose had looked at her with those 2 old eyes and said nothing. But Clara knew her sister understood that lawyers didn't solve problems like theirs. The boarding housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, was sweeping the porch when Clara arrived. She was a compact woman with iron-gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd survived the mining boom and bust without illusions. Help you, Miss Brennan? I'm looking for a man named Samuel Ashford. I was told he's staying here. Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose fractionally. He is. Room 6. But he's taking breakfast in the dining room. You want me to fetch him? No, thank you. I'll wait. The dining room was small, with 4 tables and a window that looked out on the skeletal remains of the mining works. Samuel Ashford sat alone at the far table, his back to the wall, the habit of a man who liked to see who was coming. He wore the same clothes as yesterday, neat but worn. A plate of eggs and bread sat before him, and he was eating with focused efficiency. He looked up when Clara entered, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise. A kind of quiet attention. Miss Brennan. He stood, gestured to the empty chair across from him. Join me. Clara crossed the room on legs that felt unsteady. She sat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. I've thought about your offer. I figured you might. Coffee? No, thank you. She forced herself to meet his eyes. I need to know more before I can give you an answer. Real answers. Not just talk about practicality and partnership. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. Ask, where do you live? High country. Up past Timber Ridge, in the mountains. 2 days' ride from here, maybe more depending on weather. Doing what, exactly? I told you. Cattle work. Fence lines. Breaking horses. For who? A pause. Brief but noticeable, for the landowner. Man named Ashford, and this place you live, is it his land? It is, so you're a hired hand. Living in a bunkhouse or a line shack. Something like that. Clara studied his face, looking for deception and finding only careful control. You said you had money to settle debts. Where does a ranch hand get that kind of money? Saved it. Worked steady for years. Didn't spend on much, $2,000, closer to $3,000, if we're being precise. It was possible. Unlikely, but possible. Men who worked hard and lived rough could save, especially if they had no family, no vices, no other claims on their wages. But something in the way he answered, the precision, the confidence, made her wonder what she wasn't being told. Why me? She asked quietly. Why ride all the way down here to find a wife when there must be women closer to wherever you live? Samuel took a sip of coffee, considering, women in the high country are mostly married already or spoken for. The few who aren't are looking for something I can't offer. Romance. Courtship. Promises of an easy life. He set the cup down. I heard about your family from a man who came through doing survey work. Said there was a woman in the foothills keeping her family together through sheer stubborn will. Said you worked like 3 people and never complained. That sounded like someone I could build a life with. You mean someone desperate enough to say yes? I mean someone strong enough to survive what's coming. His gaze was steady, unflinching. Winter up there is hard, Miss Brennan. The work is harder. I'm not offering you comfort. I'm offering you partnership with a man who will work beside you, won't ever raise a hand to you, and will keep his word once it's given. He leaned forward slightly. You want pretty words and soft promises, you'll need to look elsewhere. But if you want honesty and a fighting chance to keep your family together, I'm here. Clara felt something crack open in her chest. Not hope, exactly. But a kind of terrible clarity. And if I say yes, what happens to my father? To Rose and Danny, your father stays here if that's what's needed. I'll pay for his care. Find him a place in town if the cabin won't hold. Your siblings come with us until spring. After that, we see what's possible. Maybe they stay. Maybe there's a school that would suit. Maybe your father's well enough to have them back. But they stay together. And they stay safe. That's my word. Why would you do that? Take on that burden, because you won't come otherwise. And because a marriage built on you resenting me for tearing your family apart won't survive the first real storm. He pushed his plate aside, folded his hands on the table. I'm not a charitable man, Miss Brennan. I'm a practical one. You'll be more used to me if you're not grieving and guilt-ridden. So we do what's necessary to make this work. The brutal honesty of it should have repelled her. Instead, it felt like the first solid ground she'd stood on in months. I need time to think. And I need to talk to my family. Take until tomorrow. I'm riding out Monday regardless. With you or without you. Clara stood, her legs steadier now. If I agree, when would we marry? Soon as it can be arranged. I'll speak to the minister today. Get the license. We can do it Sunday if you're willing. That fast, no point waiting. You've got debts coming due and I've got work waiting. We settle this and move forward, or we don't. She nodded once, sharply. Then she turned and walked out of the dining room. Through the boarding house, into the cold October morning where her breath plumed white and the mountains rose like a wall between her and whatever future she was about to choose. She told her father first. He was awake when she returned, sitting in the chair by the window where thin sunlight fell across his lap. He looked at her face and seemed to understand before she spoke. "There's a man," Clara said quietly. "A ranch hand from the high country. He's offered to marry me and settle our debts." Patrick Brennan's expression didn't change. "You've known him how long?" "2 days. And you're considering this?" "I'm trying to decide if I have any other choice." Her father closed his eyes. "There's always a choice, Clara. The question is whether you can live with the consequences." "The bank comes Tuesday. If I do nothing, they take the cabin. They take Rose and Danny. They put you in a charity hospital where you'll die alone." Clara heard her voice shake and fought to steady it. "That's one set of consequences. The other is I marry a stranger and hope he keeps his word." "What do you know about him?" "His name is Samuel Ashford. He works cattle in the mountains. He has money saved. He wants a wife who can work and won't run when things get hard." She paused. "He says he'll make sure you're cared for. And that the children stay together." "Men say a lot of things." "I know." Patrick Brennan looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "Your mother would hate this." Clara knelt beside her father's chair, took his weathered hands in hers. "Mama would understand doing what has to be done to protect the people you love. Would she?" He squeezed her hands, his grip weak but warm. "Or would she tell you that you deserve more than a loveless marriage to a stranger?" Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Maybe I do. But Rose and Danny deserve to stay together. And you deserve to die somewhere other than a charity ward. Those things matter more than what I deserve." Her father was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "If you do this, if you marry this man, you're not doing it for me. You understand? I'm dying anyway, Clara. Might be months. Might be weeks. Don't sacrifice your life for a few extra days of mine. I'm doing it for all of us. For Rose. For Danny. For the chance that maybe, somehow, this works out better than the alternative." She straightened, releasing his hands. "But I need to know you understand. I need to know you won't think I'm abandoning you. I think you're the bravest person I've ever known," her father said roughly. "And I think you shouldn't have to be." That evening, she told Rose and Danny. They sat at the rough table that had served for meals and homework and her father's failed accounting efforts. Clara had made soup from the last of the potatoes and carrots, stretching it with flour and milk they couldn't afford. She waited until they'd eaten before she spoke. "I need to tell you both something." Danny looked up from his bowl, spoon halfway to his mouth. Rose set hers down carefully, her young face already braced for bad news. "There's a man who's offered to help us," Clara said. "His name is Samuel Ashford, and he's a ranch hand from the mountains. He's offered to marry me and pay our debts so we won't lose the cabin." "Marry you?" Danny's eyes went wide. "Like actually marry you?" "Yes, but you don't even know him." "I know enough." Clara looked at her brother. Then at her sister. "I know he has the means to help us. I know he's offering a way to keep this family together. And I know that if I don't do this, the bank will take everything on Tuesday." Rose's voice was small, careful. "What happens to us if you marry him? You come with me. Both of you. His place is in the high country, past Timber Ridge. We'll live there through the winter. And in the spring, we'll figure out what comes next." "What about Papa?" "He'll stay here. Mr. Ashford will pay for his care. Make sure he has what he needs." Danny shook his head violently. "No. We can't just leave Papa. We can't, Danny, he's dying, isn't he?" Her brother's voice cracked. "That's what this is really about. You're taking us away because Papa's dying and you don't want us to see it." The truth of it hung in the air between them. "Yes," Clara said quietly. "He's dying. The doctor says maybe through winter if he's careful. Maybe not. But either way, he can't work. He can't provide. And if the bank takes this place, he'll end up in a charity hospital. And you two will be sent to different orphanages. And I won't be able to do anything about it." She forced herself to hold Danny's gaze. "This way, at least we stay together. At least you're safe and fed and warm. That's what matters. I don't want to go to the mountains with some stranger, Danny said. I want to stay here. I want things to be normal, I know. But normal isn't something we get anymore, Rose spoke up, her voice older than 13 had any right to sound. Is he a good man? This Samuel Ashford, Clara thought about the quiet cowboy with his worn coat and steady eyes. His brutal honesty and his careful promises. I don't know, she admitted. But I think he's an honest one. And right now, that's the best I can hope for. When? Rose asked. Sunday. We'd marry Sunday and leave Monday morning. 3 days. Yes. Rose looked at Danny, then back at Clara. Then we better start packing. Saturday morning, Clara walked back to Silver Creek and found Samuel Ashford at the livery. Checking his horse's shoes with patient thoroughness. I'll do it, she said without preamble. I'll marry you, he straightened, studying her face. You sure? No. But I'm out of better options. Something that might have been respect flickered in his expression. Fair enough. I've spoken to the minister. He'll do the ceremony tomorrow afternoon if that suits. It suits. There's paperwork. License has to be filed. You'll need to sign some documents about the debt settlement. I've arranged for the bank payment to be made Monday morning before we leave. How? Clara heard the suspicion in her voice. You just happen to have that much cash on hand. I have arrangements. Before she could press, he continued, your father. I've spoken to Mrs. Chen. She's willing to take him as a boarder. Give him a room on the ground floor where the stairs won't trouble him. Doctor visits twice a week. Meals included. I'll pay 6 months in advance. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. That's generous. That's necessary. Like I said, you'll be no use to me if you're grieving. He pulled a small leather pouch from his coat pocket, handed it to her. $50. For anything you and your family need before we leave. Clothes, supplies, whatever. She took the pouch, feeling the weight of the coins inside. You're trusting me with this, I'm trusting you not to run off with it. If that's what you're asking. Are you planning to? No, then I'm not worried. He returned his attention to the horse's hoof, running his thumb along the shoe's edge. Bring what you can carry. The wagon has room for personal items, but we travel light. Winter gear especially. Warm coat, good boots, gloves. Where we're going, you'll need them. How cold does it get? Cold enough that you'll think hell might be preferable. He glanced at her, but the cabin's solid and the stove works. We won't freeze, we. You, me, Rose and Danny. There's room for all of us. Clara watched him work, his hands sure and gentle on the animal's leg. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why aren't you married already? A man your age with money saved and steady work, seems like you'd have had opportunities. Samuel set the horse's hoof down, straightened. I was married once. 10 years ago. She died in childbirth. Along with the baby, he met her eyes. After that, I didn't see much point in trying again. Until I realized I was getting too old to keep working alone and too set in my ways to tolerate most people. Figured I needed someone practical. Someone who understood hard work and hard choices. That led me to you. The honesty of it, the lack of sentiment or apology, should have been off-putting. Instead, Clara found it almost comforting. I'm sorry. About your wife and child, it was a long time ago. He picked up his tools, closed the leather kit. Tomorrow then. 2 o'clock at the church. Bring your family. I'll have witnesses arranged. All right. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Miss Brennan. Clara, she looked back. Once we're married, once we leave here, there's no changing your mind. The work is hard. The isolation is real. And winter up there can break people who aren't prepared for it. If you have any doubts, any at all, now's the time to walk away. Clara thought about the bank letter under her pillow. About Rose's two old eyes and Danny's anger and her father's ruined lungs. About the choice between certain disaster and uncertain hope. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said. 2 o'clock, then she walked out of the livery and back toward the cabin, $50 in her pocket and 3 days left of the only life she'd ever known. But that night, something happened that would change everything. Clara couldn't sleep. She walked into town under moonlight, needing air, needing distance from the weight of her decision. The boarding house was quiet. Most windows dark, except one on the second floor where voices carried. She shouldn't have stopped. Shouldn't have listened. But she recognized one voice, Samuel Ashford's. And the other, a woman's, sharp with anger. "You're being reckless, Samuel. Marrying some mining girl you don't even know." "It's my choice, Margaret, Margaret." Clara froze. "Your choices affect all of us. If you bring her to the valley, if she finds out what happened to Anna, she won't, you can't know that. And if she does, if she learns the truth, she'll run. Just like every other woman who's come near you since." "Enough," Samuel's voice cut through. "Cold, I know what I'm doing. Clara Brennan is not Anna. She's stronger. She won't break." "That's what you thought about Anna." Silence. Long and terrible, then Margaret again, softer. "I'm trying to protect you, Samuel. I'm trying to protect what Jonathan built. If this girl destroys you the way Anna did, she won't. How can you be sure?" "Because Clara is marrying me out of necessity, not love. There's no illusion to shatter. No expectations to fail. That makes her safer than any woman who'd come to the valley believing in romance." Clara backed away from the window, her heart hammering. Anna. A woman who'd broken. Who'd run, or maybe worse, she should confront Samuel. Demand the truth. But something stopped her, the weight of her father's illness, Rose and Danny's future, the bank's deadline bearing down like a landslide. She was already trapped. The question was whether knowing the truth would save her or destroy her last chance at survival. Clara walked back to the cabin in darkness, Samuel Ashford's words echoing. She won't break. Tomorrow, she would marry him, and then she would discover what had happened to the woman named Anna in the valley where winter never truly left. Sunday arrived cold and bright, Clara dressed in her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her taller frame. The ivory silk had yellowed with age, but it was still beautiful. Rose had woven late asters into her hair. Danny had polished her boots until they shone. Her father sat in the chair by the window, too weak to attend the ceremony but strong enough to give his blessing. "You look like your mother," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wish she could be here. She is. In everything you've become." He reached for her hand. "Be careful, Clara. Trust carefully. And if things go wrong, if you need help, I'll find a way. I know, Papa." But even as she said it, Clara knew, if things went wrong in the mountains, her father would be too far away to save her. The church was small, weathered, attended mostly by miners' families and a few ranchers who still worked the lower country. Clara walked down the aisle alone, Rose and Danny behind her, and found Samuel Ashford waiting at the altar in a dark suit that looked new, his beard freshly trimmed, his expression unreadable. The minister spoke the words. Clara heard herself respond. Samuel's hand was warm and calloused when he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger. "You may kiss the bride." Samuel leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, brief, chaste. His eyes, close enough to see clearly for the first time, held something she couldn't quite name. Not affection. Not passion. But a kind of quiet determination. "Mrs. Ashford," he said softly. "Mr. Ashford." They signed the documents. The witnesses, Mrs. Chen and the livery owner, added their names. The minister filed the license, and just like that, Clara Brennan became Clara Ashford, married to a mountain cowboy she'd known for 3 days, bound by law and desperation to a future she couldn't predict. Outside the church, Samuel helped her into the wagon. Rose and Danny climbed into the back. Surrounded by the few belongings they'd been able to pack. The November sun slanted across the foothills, gilding everything with light that would be gone in another hour. "Ready?" Samuel asked. Clara looked back at the church. At Silver Creek beyond. At the life she was leaving. Then she looked at her brother and sister holding each other in the wagon bed, and at the man beside her who'd offered them all a chance. "Ready," she said. Samuel clicked to the horses, and the wagon rolled forward, carrying them toward the mountains and winter and whatever waited in the high country. Behind them, the foothills faded into autumn mist. Ahead, the peaks rose sharp and white against the darkening sky. Beautiful, merciless, and unknown, the wagon climbed steadily as afternoon gave way to evening, following a trail that grew narrower and rougher with each passing mile. Clara sat beside Samuel on the bench seat, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from trembling, though whether from cold or fear or the sheer unreality of what she'd done, she couldn't say. Behind them, Rose and Danny huddled beneath the canvas tarp, silent except for the occasional whisper. They'd been subdued since leaving Silver Creek, the weight of their new reality settling over them like snow. Samuel drove with quiet competence, his attention on the trail and the horses. He'd spoken perhaps a dozen words since they'd left the church. Clara found herself studying him in sidelong glances. The strong line of his jaw. The capable hands holding the reins. The way he sat the wagon seat as if it were an extension of himself. This was her husband now. This stranger, the thought made her throat tight. How much farther, she asked, more to break the silence than because she needed to know. We'll camp tonight. Reach the valley tomorrow afternoon if the weather holds. Camp. Clara looked at the darkening sky, the mountains rising on either side of them. Out here, there's a spot another hour up where the trail widens. Good water. Shelter from wind. I've used it before. He glanced at her. You ever camp outside? No, you'll learn. Won't be the last time. The trail curved around a massive boulder, and suddenly they were climbing more steeply, the horses leaning into their harnesses. Clara gripped the edge of the seat as the wagon tilted, her stomach dropping. Easy, Samuel said quietly, whether to her or the horses, she wasn't certain. We're fine. This team could pull twice the weight, that's reassuring. You afraid of heights? I don't know. I've never been this high before. Something that might have been amusement crossed his face. We're barely into the foothills. Wait until tomorrow. Clara decided not to ask what he meant. The sun was setting when they reached the campsite, a flat shelf of rock overhung by a cliff face, with a thin stream running through a crack in the stone. Samuel pulled the team to a stop and climbed down, his movements efficient and unhurried. Danny, he called to the wagon bed. Come help me with the horses. There was a pause. Then her brother emerged from under the canvas, his expression wary. What do you need? Need to unhitch the team. Water them. Hobble them for the night. I'll show you how. Danny looked at Clara. She nodded, trying to convey encouragement she didn't entirely feel. Her brother climbed down reluctantly and followed Samuel to the front of the wagon. Rose appeared at Clara's elbow, her face pale in the dimming light. I don't like this, I know. What if he's not what he says? What if we get up there and, then we'll deal with it? Clara put her arm around her sister's thin shoulders. But right now, we need to help set up camp. Can you do that? Rose nodded, though her eyes were frightened. Clara had never made a camp before, but she'd cooked over a wood stove her whole life, and the principles weren't so different. While Samuel and Danny tended the horses, she and Rose gathered deadfall from the scattered pines that clung to the mountainside. Samuel had kindling and matches in a tin box in the wagon, along with a blackened coffee pot and a pan for frying. There's bacon wrapped in cloth, he said, returning from the horses. Beans in the tin. Bread in the sack. Make what you can with that. It wasn't a request or an order. Just a statement of available resources. Clara found the food where he'd indicated and set to work. Samuel built a fire ring from stones. Danny watched with careful attention. The fire caught quickly, and soon the smell of frying bacon filled the small camp. Clara warmed the beans in the pan, sliced the bread, poured coffee when the pot boiled. It was simple food, trail food, but after the long day and the cold ride, it tasted better than anything she'd eaten in weeks. They ate sitting on their bedrolls around the fire, tin plates balanced on their knees. Samuel ate steadily, his attention on his food. Danny picked at his meal, stealing glances at the man who was now legally part of their family. Rose ate nothing, just held her plate and stared into the flames. Not hungry? Samuel asked her. Rose shook her head. You should eat. Tomorrow's a long day, and the altitude will make you tired. I'm fine. Suit yourself. Samuel set his empty plate aside, poured himself more coffee. But if you get lightheaded tomorrow, don't expect me to slow down for it. Rose's chin came up, a flash of defiance in her young face. I said I'm fine, Rose. Clara's voice was quiet but firm. Eat something. Even if it's just the bread. For a moment, she thought her sister would refuse. Then Rose picked up a piece of bread and bit into it, her movements sharp with suppressed anger. Samuel watched this exchange without comment, his expression unreadable. When Rose had eaten half the bread, he stood and began collecting the tin plates. I'll wash these. Danny, you want to learn how to bank a fire for the night? Danny looked at Clara again. She nodded. Her brother rose and followed Samuel to the stream, leaving Clara and Rose alone by the flames. I hate this, Rose whispered. I know, he's bossy and he doesn't smile and he treats us like we're just burdens he has to manage. Clara pulled her sister close. He's practical. That's different from mean. And right now, practical is what we need. I want to go home. So do I. Clara rested her cheek against Rose's hair. But home isn't safe anymore. This is what we have now. We make the best of it. Rose was quiet for a long time. Then she said, very softly, are you scared? Yes. What if he hurts you? Clara had been asking herself the same question since she'd agreed to this marriage. Then I'll find a way to protect myself. And you. And Danny. I promise. You can't promise that, maybe not. But I can promise I'll try. At the stream, Samuel was showing Danny how to scrub the plates with sand and cold water, his voice low and patient. Watching them, Clara felt a strange twist in her chest. This man had paid their debts, married her, taken on the burden of two angry, frightened children. And he'd done it all without expectation of gratitude or affection. She didn't know if that made him honorable or simply calculating. She suspected she'd spend the winter finding out. When the fire was banked and the camp settled for the night, Samuel spread two bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire ring. He pointed to the one farthest from the cliff face. You and Rose take that one. Danny and I'll take this one. Keeps the girls safer from anything that might wander through. Clara blinked. We're not, sharing a bedroll on our wedding night. Samuel's voice was dry. No, ma'am. You're exhausted. Your sister's terrified. And we're camped on a mountainside in November. This isn't the time or the place. He pulled off his boots, lay down on his bedroll fully clothed. We'll talk about sleeping arrangements when we reach the cabin. For now, get some rest. Dawn comes early. Clara felt her face flush, though whether from relief or embarrassment, she couldn't say. She and Rose settled into their bedroll, her sister pressed against her side like she used to when she was small and afraid of thunder. Danny lay down awkwardly on the other bedroll, keeping as much distance from Samuel as possible. The fire crackled between them, casting shifting shadows on the cliff face. Mr. Ashford. Danny's voice was small in the darkness. Just Samuel, Samuel. Are there bears up here? Sometimes. Mostly they're denate up by now, but you get a late wanderer occasionally. There was a pause, but I've got my rifle, and the fire will keep them off. You're safe. How do you know? Because I've camped this spot 100 times and never lost anyone yet. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it reminded Clara that this man had a life they knew nothing about. Routines and knowledge and experiences that were completely foreign to them. They were entering his world now. On his terms, and they had no choice but to trust that he'd keep them alive. Sleep was a long time coming. Clara lay awake, listening to the wind in the pines and the occasional crack of the fire settling, feeling Rose's breathing slow and even out. Across the flames, Samuel lay still, his rifle within easy reach, his face in shadow. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her. She dreamed of the cabin in the foothills, of her father's labored breathing, of bank letters and falling snow and roads that led only upward into cold and uncertainty. When she woke, frost covered her bedroll and the stars were beginning to fade. Samuel was already up, rebuilding the fire, his breath steaming in the pre-dawn air. The second day of her marriage had begun. They broke camp in the pale gray light before sunrise, eating cold bread and dried apples while Samuel hitched the team. Danny helped without being asked this time, his movements clumsy but willing. Rose stayed close to Clara, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes still heavy with sleep. "Weather's changing," Samuel said, looking at the sky. "We need to move." Clara followed his gaze. The mountains to the west were hidden behind a wall of gray cloud, and the wind had shifted, carrying the smell of snow. "How far are we from this valley of yours?" "6 hours if we push. 8 if we don't." He checked the harnesses one final time, then turned to face her. "I'm going to push. The trail gets dangerous in snow, and I don't want to be caught halfway when it hits." Then we push. They climbed into the wagon, and Samuel set the team to a faster pace than yesterday. The trail here was better defined, wide enough for the wagon with room to spare. But it climbed relentlessly. Clara's ears began to pop from the altitude, and she noticed both Rose and Danny looked pale. "Breathe deep," Samuel told them. "Your body needs to adjust. It'll pass in a day or two." The landscape changed as they climbed. The scattered pines gave way to thick forest, then to stands of aspen whose bare branches clattered in the wind. Snow appeared in patches, then in continuous blankets beneath the trees. The air grew thinner, colder. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses at a small clearing where a spring bubbled from beneath a massive granite shelf. Samuel filled their canteens, watered the team, shared out more bread and dried meat. "How much higher?" Danny asked, his voice tight with altitude and apprehension. "Another 1,000 feet or so. Then we drop into the valley. I can't breathe right, that's the altitude." "Sit down. Take slow breaths. Don't gulp the air." Danny sat on a fallen log, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Clara moved to comfort him, but Samuel was already there, crouching beside her brother. "Look at me," he said quietly. "Slow down. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Match my breathing." He breathed slowly, deliberately, and Danny tried to follow. Gradually, the boys' panic eased. "Good," Samuel said. "You're doing fine. This is normal. By tonight, you won't even notice." "I feel dizzy." "That'll pass too. Drink some water. Eat something even if you don't want to. Your body's working harder up here. Needs fuel." He handed Danny a piece of dried apple and waited until the boy ate it before standing. Clara watched this with surprise and something warmer. The man was gruff and spare with his words, but there was patience in how he dealt with Danny's fear that spoke of unexpected kindness. "Thank you," she said quietly. Samuel glanced at her. "For what?" "For being gentle with him. He's a kid in a strange place with strangers. Of course he's scared." Samuel moved back to the wagon, began checking the harnesses again. "Doesn't mean he can't learn. Doesn't mean he won't be fine. Just means he needs time." They pushed on, and the trail grew steeper. Now Clara could see why Samuel had been concerned about snow. The path clung to the mountainside, dropping away sharply on the left. In places, the wagon wheels rolled within inches of empty air. She tried not to look down. Tried not to think about what would happen if a wheel slipped or the horses spooked or, "Trust the team," Samuel said, as if reading her thoughts. "They've made this trip dozens of times. They know the trail better than I do." "That's not as comforting as you think it is." The corner of his mouth lifted, what might have been a smile. "Fair point." the first snow began to fall as they reached the highest point of the trail. Fat, heavy flakes that melted on contact with the wagon but stuck to the ground in a thin white sheet. Samuel urged the team faster, and the wagon jolted over rocks and ruts, swaying dangerously on the narrow track. "Hold on," he said. Clara gripped the seat, her heart hammering. Behind her, she heard Rose whimper and Danny's sharp intake of breath. Then they rounded a curve, and the trail began to descend. The change was dramatic. On one side of the ridge, the world had been rock and thin forest and bitter wind. On this side, the slope fell away into a broad valley, sheltered by mountains on three sides. Trees clustered thick along a river that ran silver through the center. Meadows spread out in wide clearings where snow lay pristine and untouched, and in the center of it all, where the valley widened and the river bent, stood a cluster of buildings, not a lined shack, not a crude cabin or a bunkhouse. A lodge. 2 stories, built of massive logs with a stone chimney and wide porches. Barns flanking it on either side, their roofs high and solid. Corrals and fences stretching into the distance. Smoke rising from the chimney in a steady plume. Clara stared. Beside her, Samuel had gone very still. "What is that?" she asked slowly. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he said, "That's where we're going. That's not a lined shack. No, that's not where a ranch hand lives. No." Clara turned to look at him fully, her mind racing. "You said you worked cattle. You said you hired on." "I do work cattle. I do hire on when needed. For who? Who owns this?" Samuel's jaw tightened. He kept his eyes on the trail, guiding the team down the steep descent with careful precision. "I do." The words hung between them like a slap. "You what?" "I own the land. The buildings. The operation." His voice was flat, emotionless. "My name is Samuel Ashford. My father was Jonathan Ashford. He built the timber operation here 20 years ago. When he died, it came to me." Clara couldn't breathe. Her vision tunneled, and she gripped the wagon seat so hard her knuckles went white. "You lied to me." "I didn't lie. I told you I worked cattle and broke horses. I do. I told you I lived in the high country. I do. I just didn't tell you everything. You let me think you were a hired hand. You let me think." She couldn't finish the sentence. Rage choked her, hot and bitter. "You stood in that boarding house and watched me worry about whether you had enough money saved. Whether you could afford to help my family. And you knew. You knew you owned all of this." "Yes." "Why?" The word came out nearly as a shout. Behind them, Rose and Danny had gone silent, listening. "Why would you do that? Why deceive me?" Samuel's hands tightened on the reins, but his voice remained level. "Because I needed to know you'd come for the right reasons. The right reasons. I came because my family was about to lose everything. I came because I was desperate." "Exactly. You came because you needed help. Not because you wanted money. You chose me based on what you thought I was, a working man with modest means and honest intentions." He finally looked at her, his gray eyes steady and implacable. "If I'd told you the truth, if I'd ridden up to your cabin and said I owned half the timber in the territory and had more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, what would you have thought?" "I would have thought you were insane to offer marriage to a stranger. And you would have wondered what I really wanted. You would have questioned every word I said. Looked for the trap. Assumed I had ulterior motives." He turned his attention back to the trail. "This way, you made your choice based on character. Not circumstance. You agreed to marry a man you thought was poor but honest. That tells me what I needed to know about who you are." Clara felt something crack open in her chest. Not just anger, but deep, betrayed hurt. "You tested me. You manipulated me. I protected myself. And you, how does lying protect me? Because now I know you didn't marry me for money. Now I know that when things get hard, and they will, you won't run because the luxury isn't worth the effort." His voice hardened slightly. "You chose this life thinking it would be rough and poor and difficult. Well, it'll still be difficult. Just in different ways." He paused, and for what it's worth, everything I told you about needing a partner was true. I do need someone practical. I do need someone who won't run when challenged. The fact that I can afford better food and warmer clothes doesn't change any of that. The wagon reached the valley floor, and Samuel guided the team onto a well-maintained road that ran straight toward the lodge. Clara sat rigid, her mind reeling, all of it. The careful questions. The measured responses. The story about saving wages, it had all been a performance. He'd watched her struggle with the decision. Watched her weigh practicality against fear. And he'd known the entire time that he held all the power. I want to leave, she said quietly. No, you don't. Don't tell me what I want. Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop in the middle of the road. He turned to face her fully, and his expression was harder than she'd seen it before. You want to leave? Fine. I'll turn this wagon around right now and take you back to Silver Creek. I'll give you enough money to settle your debts and set you up somewhere. Your family will be provided for. He paused, but your father will still die in a boarding house room. Your brother and sister will still grow up knowing they were saved by charity. And you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if you made the right choice, throwing away security and partnership because your pride was hurt. My pride, yes. Your pride. I deceived you about money. Not about who I am. Not about what I need. Not about how I'll treat you. Just about money. His voice softened fractionally. And now you're angry because you feel foolish for not seeing it. I understand that. But if you let it drive you away, you're making a worse decision than anything I did. Clara wanted to scream at him. Wanted to demand he take her back. Wanted to prove she couldn't be bought or manipulated or controlled. But she looked at Rose and Danny huddled in the wagon bed. At the valley spread before them with its solid buildings and smoke and safety, and she thought about the alternative waiting in Silver Creek: debt. Separation. Her father dying alone. Her siblings scattered. Samuel Ashford had lied to her. But he'd also saved them. She hated that those two truths could exist simultaneously. If I stay, she said slowly, things change. No more secrets. No more tests. You treat me like a partner, not a problem to be managed. Agreed, and my family stays together. No matter what, that was the deal. That's still the deal. Clara took a deep breath, then another. Her hands were shaking. I don't trust you, that's fair. You'll have to decide if you can learn to. She looked at the lodge again. At the promise of warmth and shelter. At the life she'd thought she was choosing and the life that actually waited. Then she looked at her husband, because despite everything, he was still legally and irrevocably that, and saw not cruelty in his face, but a kind of exhausted pragmatism that matched her own drive. She said, before she could change her mind. Samuel clicked to the horses, and the wagon rolled forward. Behind them, Danny whispered something to Rose that Clara couldn't hear. Ahead, the lodge grew larger. More real. More impossible. This was her home now. This hidden valley. This vast operation. This man who'd bought her salvation with money she hadn't known he possessed. Clara pulled her coat tighter and tried to imagine a future where any of this made sense. The valley swallowed them, and the mountains rose on every side like walls, beautiful and imprisoning and absolute. They were still a quarter mile from the lodge when a woman appeared on the porch. Even at a distance, Clara could see she was tall, elegantly dressed in a dark traveling suit that looked absurdly formal against the rough timber backdrop. Her hair was silver gray, pinned in a style that spoke of city salons and careful maintenance. She stood with her hands folded at her waist, watching the wagon approach with the stillness of a hawk observing prey. Who is that? Clara asked, though something in her chest already knew the answer would be complicated. Samuel's jaw tightened. My sister. Margaret Ashford. You didn't mention family. I was hoping she wouldn't be here. He slowed the team as they entered the yard. She lives in Denver most of the year. Manages the business side of the operation, contracts, sales, investors. She's not supposed to arrive until spring, but she's here now, yes. The lodge loomed larger as they drew closer, and Clara could see details she'd missed from the ridge, the intricate joinery of the logs, the leaded glass in some of the windows, the carved panels flanking the front door. This wasn't frontier construction. This was wealth built to last. Designed to impress, Samuel brought the wagon to a stop at the base of the porch steps. He climbed down, his movements controlled, and turned to help Clara. His hand was steady on hers, but she could feel the tension in his grip. Samuel, Margaret Ashford's voice was cultured, cool as the mountain air. You didn't send word you were returning. And with guests, not guests. Family. Samuel kept his hand on Clara's elbow as she descended, a gesture that could have been courtesy or claim. This is my wife, Clara. Her sister Rose and brother Danny. Margaret's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Calculation, perhaps. Or controlled fury. She descended the steps with measured grace, stopping a careful distance away. Your wife. The word held no inflection. No warmth. How unexpected, is it? Samuel's voice was flat. We've discussed this matter repeatedly over the past 3 years. You knew I intended to marry. I knew you spoke of it. I didn't realize you'd act with such haste. Margaret's gaze moved to Clara, and it felt like being assessed by a banker examining collateral. Where are you from, Mrs. Ashford? Colorado Territory, Clara said, lifting her chin. The foothills below Silver Creek, I see. And your family's occupation, mining. Before my father's illness, mining. Margaret repeated the word as if it tasted unpleasant. How enterprising. And you met Samuel how, exactly? That's enough. Samuel's voice carried an edge now. Clara is cold and tired from 2 days' travel. So are the children. We'll have time for interrogations later. I'm not interrogating, brother. I'm attempting to understand the situation you've placed us all in. Margaret folded her hands again, that gesture of controlled composure. You leave here claiming to need time to think. You return 6 weeks later with a wife from the mining camps and 2 children in tow. Surely you understand my concern. Your concern is noted. Now, if you'll excuse us, the investors are arriving next week. The words landed like stones in water. Samuel went very still. What investors? The ones from Chicago. Mr. Petton and his associates. I wrote you about this months ago. They're considering a significant capital investment in the timber operation, but they want to tour the facilities. Meet the ownership. Margaret's smile was thin and sharp. They're bringing their wives. There will be dinners. Social events. Presentations. I trust you remember how to conduct yourself in such settings. She paused. And I trust your new bride will learn quickly. From the wagon bed came a small voice, Clara. I don't feel good. Rose had gone pale, her face sheened with sweat despite the cold. Clara moved immediately, climbing into the wagon bed. What's wrong, dizzy? And my stomach, it's the altitude, Samuel said, already moving to the back of the wagon. Danny, help me get her down. We need to get her inside. Lying flat, they lifted Rose carefully from the wagon, and Samuel carried her toward the lodge with surprising gentleness. Margaret stepped aside. Her expression disapproving but silent. The interior of the lodge was as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings supported by massive beams, a stone fireplace large enough to stand in, furniture that looked both comfortable and expensive. But Clara barely registered any of it as Samuel carried Rose through the main room and up a wide staircase. Second door on the left, he said. That'll be your room. Get her lying down, feet elevated. I'll bring water. The room was large, furnished with a 4-poster bed, a wardrobe, a writing desk near the window. Clara pulled back the quilts and helped Rose settle against the pillows, propping her feet on a folded blanket. Just breathe. She murmured, smoothing her sister's hair back. Slow and steady. You're safe now. Rose's eyes were glassy, confused. This place. It's so big. Why is it so big? I don't know. Clara's voice was tight. I don't know anything anymore, Samuel returned with a pitcher of water and a glass. He poured carefully, handed it to Clara, small sips. Her body needs to adjust. She'll feel better by morning, and if she doesn't, then I'll ride for the doctor in Timber Ridge. But it's just altitude sickness. I've seen it 100 times. He glanced at Rose, then at Clara. Stay with her. I'll have someone bring up your things. Someone? I have staff. Housekeeper, cook, 2 men who work the barns and maintenance. He moved toward the door. Margaret has her own suite on the first floor. You and Rose have this room. Danny will be across the hall. My room is at the end of the corridor. He left before Clara could ask about the sleeping arrangements he'd promised to discuss. She heard his boots on the stairs. The low murmur of voices from below. Then silence. Rose had closed her eyes, her breathing evening out. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the water glass, and tried to process everything that had happened in the past hour. Her husband was not a poor cowboy but a wealthy landowner. His sister, elegant, calculating, clearly displeased, was here to manage business interests that involved Chicago investors and social dinners. And somewhere in this enormous lodge, staff members were going about their duties. People who would now be part of her daily life. She'd married Samuel Ashford thinking she'd be cooking over a lined shack stove and hauling water from a creek. Instead, she was sitting in a bedroom that could have fit her entire family's cabin, surrounded by more wealth than she'd ever imagined, and she had no idea how to navigate any of it. The anger that had burned so hot on the wagon ride here settled into something colder and more sustainable. Samuel had tested her. Judged her. Decided she was worthy of his trust based on criteria she hadn't known existed, and now she was expected to what? Play hostess to Chicago investors. Present herself as the appropriate wife of a timber baron. She didn't even know what fork to use at a formal dinner. Footsteps on the stairs pulled her from her thoughts. A woman appeared in the doorway, middle-aged, strong-featured, with kind eyes and flour on her apron. Mrs. Ashford. I'm Hannah Moss, the housekeeper. Mr. Samuel asked me to bring up your things and see if you needed anything. The name felt foreign. Mrs. Ashford. As if she were playing a role in someone else's story. Thank you. My sister's not feeling well. The altitude, poor lamb. I'll bring up some ginger tea and crackers. That usually helps. Hannah set down the carpet bag and small trunk that held their belongings. I've put fresh linens on the bed already. And there's a basin and pitcher for washing. The bathing room is down the hall, indoor plumbing, heated water. Mr. Samuel had it installed 2 years back. Indoor plumbing, of course. That's very kind. Hannah hesitated. If you don't mind my saying, ma'am, you look about done in yourself. When's the last time you ate? This morning. Bread and dried apples. That won't do. I'll bring up supper trays for you and the children. Something light that'll sit easy. She moved toward the door, then paused. And Mrs. Ashford, don't let Miss Margaret trouble you. She's protective of Mr. Samuel and the business, but her bark's worse than her bite. After Hannah left, Clara stood and moved to the window. It looked out over the valley, toward the river and the mountains beyond. The view was breathtaking. Pristine snow, dark pines, the last light of day gilding the peaks, beautiful and isolating in equal measure. She was trapped here. Not by force or cruelty, but by choice and circumstance and the brutal logic of survival. She could leave, theoretically. Samuel had offered as much, but leaving meant returning to debt and dissolution. Meant watching her family scatter to the winds, so she would stay, but on her terms now. Not his. Clara pressed her palm against the cold window glass and watched darkness fall over the valley. Tomorrow, she would begin figuring out how to survive in this new world. Tonight, she would let herself feel the weight of betrayal, and somewhere in the lodge below, Samuel Ashford sat alone with his secrets, about the valley, about the woman named Anna, about all the truths he hadn't yet told. Winter was coming, and Clara was beginning to understand that the cold outside was nothing compared to the ice that could form between two people who'd built a marriage on lies. Clara woke to pale morning light filtering through unfamiliar windows. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed back. The valley, the lodge, Samuel's deception, the vast gulf between what she'd expected and what she'd found. Rose slept beside her, color returning to her cheeks. Breathing deep and steady. The altitude sickness had passed, just as Samuel had promised. The next morning brought the business tour, a journey through the timber operation that revealed the full scope of what Samuel had built. Or what his father had built. Clara was beginning to understand that the distinction mattered. They rode in wagons through the working camps, past crews of men with massive two-man saws, teams of horses dragging felled trees. Samuel explained everything with quiet authority: sustainable cutting practices, safety protocols, quality controls. He walked through the work sites in his worn boots, completely at home among the sawdust and sweat. And Clara saw the respect in the workers' faces when he spoke. Petton asked pointed questions about profit margins and expansion capacity. Walsh wanted to know about competition and transportation costs. Harrison probed the labor situation and potential strikes. Samuel answered them all with unflappable competence. But it was Margaret Petton who asked the question that changed everything. And the workers' housing? She gestured to a row of rough cabins visible through the trees. I noticed some of the structures looked rather primitive. They are, Samuel acknowledged without hesitation. It's one of the areas I'd prioritize if we secure additional capital. Better housing means workers stay longer, work safer, produce more. It's sound business. Not just charity. But expensive initially. The return on investment is clear: lower turnover, fewer accidents, higher morale. He glanced at Clara. My wife has some thoughts on this as well, actually. Every eye turned to her. Clara felt a flash of panic. He hadn't warned her, hadn't prepared her for this. But then she thought about the workers' cabins they'd passed. About the thin walls and inadequate stoves. About families living in conditions not much better than her own family's cabin had been. Decent housing isn't charity, she said quietly. It's respect. When people feel valued, they invest themselves in the work. When they feel disposable, they do the minimum to survive. She met Petton's gaze directly. You can't build something lasting on the backs of people who are just trying to make it through another winter. There was a long silence. Then Petton nodded slowly. Interesting perspective. Idealistic, perhaps, but interesting. Not idealistic, Margaret Ashford interjected. Strategic. Employee retention and productivity have measurable financial impact. Clara's framing it in moral terms, but the business case is sound. Again, Margaret had stepped in to legitimize Clara's words. To translate them from sentiment into acceptable business language. Clara was beginning to understand that this was how it worked in this world. She could speak her truth. But someone with power needed to frame it in terms that men like Petton would value. It was manipulative. It was also effective. That evening, after the investors retired, Clara finally made her decision. She found Margaret Ashford in the library, reviewing ledgers by lamplight. I need to talk to you, Clara said. About Anna. Margaret's pen stopped moving. For a long moment, she didn't look up. Samuel should be the one to tell you. Samuel has had every opportunity to tell me. He's chosen not to. Clara closed the door behind her. But you will. Because you need me to succeed in Denver next week. And I can't do that carrying the weight of a secret I don't understand. Margaret set down her pen, finally meeting Clara's eyes. What do you already know? I know there was a woman named Anna. I know she lived here. I know something terrible happened to her. And I know Samuel blames himself. Clara moved closer to the desk. And I know you're terrified I'll make the same mistake she did. Margaret was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than Clara had ever heard it. Anna was Samuel's first wife. They married young. She was 19, he was 24. She came from a good family in Denver. Educated, accomplished, beautiful. Everything a frontier timber baron could want. Margaret stood, moved to the window. But Anna hated it here. The isolation. The cold. The endless winter. She tried, God knows she tried. But she was like a hothouse flower transplanted to granite. She couldn't take root. What happened? She became pregnant. We all thought, hoped, that having a child would help. Give her purpose. Connection. But the pregnancy was difficult. She was sick constantly. And the isolation made it worse. Margaret's voice dropped. The baby came early. 2 months early, in the dead of winter. There was no doctor, no midwife. Just Hannah and me trying to save them both. Clara felt her throat tighten. The baby lived 3 hours. A little girl. Anna held her until she stopped breathing. Then Margaret's voice broke. She walked out into the snow 2 days later. We found her 3 miles from the lodge. She'd walked until she couldn't walk anymore. Until the cold took her, the words landed like physical blows. Samuel found her, yes. And it broke something in him. Margaret turned from the window. He blamed himself for bringing her here. For not seeing how much she was suffering. For choosing this valley over her well-being. That's why he tested you, Clara. He needed to know you were strong enough for this life. That you wouldn't walk into winter. Yes, Clara sat down heavily in the nearest chair. Her hands were shaking. Why didn't he tell me? Because men like Samuel don't know how to speak their grief. They bury it in work and silence and tell themselves that's strength. Margaret moved back to the desk. But you need to understand something. Anna's death wasn't about the valley or the isolation. It was about fear. She was afraid of the pain, afraid of failing, afraid of being trapped. And fear made her see death as the only escape. She leaned forward, her gaze intense. You're not Anna, Clara. You're not afraid of hard things. You're not looking for escape. That's why Samuel chose you. That's why I'm helping you now. Because if you can survive what's coming, the investors, the scrutiny, the pressure, you'll prove to him that this valley doesn't have to be a grave. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You are. You've already proven it. Margaret's voice was firm. But you need to decide, are you going to let Anna's story define yours? Or are you going to write a different ending? That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She found herself wandering the lodge in darkness, her feet carrying her to a door at the end of the second-floor hallway. A door Margaret had specifically avoided during the tour. Clara pushed it open. The room was dark, dusty from disuse. But moonlight through the window showed her what it had been, a nursery. A small bed with carved railings. A rocking chair by the window. And on a shelf, a wooden cradle with Anna carved into the headboard. Samuel's voice came from behind her. I wondered when you'd find this. Clara turned. He stood in the doorway, his face in shadow. Margaret told you, yes, about Anna. About the baby, yes. Samuel stepped into the room, moved to the cradle. His hand rested on the carved wood with infinite gentleness. Her name was Sarah. Sarah Elizabeth Ashford. She lived 3 hours and 17 minutes. I counted every second. His voice was rough with old grief. Anna couldn't bear it. The loss. The guilt. The thought of trying again and failing again. So she walked out into winter and didn't come back. Clara moved to stand beside him. I'm sorry. For all of it. Are you afraid now? Knowing what happened here, terrified, Clara admitted. But not of the valley. Not of winter. I'm afraid of grief that deep. Of loss that complete. Of becoming someone who sees death as mercy. She touched his arm. But I'm not Anna, Samuel. I'm not looking for escape. I'm looking for a reason to stay. He turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight, she could see tears on his face. I tested you because I couldn't bear to watch another woman break in this valley. I lied about who I was because I needed to know you'd come for honest reasons, not money. I've kept you at distance because I was afraid that I'd leave. That I'd love you and lose you the way I lost them." The admission hung between them, raw and terrible and true. Clara reached up, cupped his face in her hands. "I'm not going anywhere. Not because I'm trapped. Not because I have no choice. But because I choose this. I choose you. I choose to build something here that isn't haunted by the past." Samuel pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. "I don't know how to do this. How to let you in without being afraid. We learn together. One day at a time. One choice at a time." They stood in that moonlit nursery, holding each other in the room where hope had died, and began the slow work of building something new from the ruins of what had been lost. Later that night, Samuel took Clara to the place where he'd found Anna. They walked in silence through snow that glittered under starlight, following a path that led away from the lodge toward a stand of pines. The cold was brutal, but Clara didn't turn back. At the edge of a clearing, Samuel stopped. "Here." Clara looked around. It was beautiful, the kind of beauty that could kill you if you weren't careful. Mountains rising on all sides. Snow untouched except for their footprints. Silence so complete it felt like the world holding its breath. What was she thinking? Clara asked quietly. "When she walked out here, I don't know. I've asked myself that 1,000 times." Samuel's voice was barely audible. Maybe she was thinking about the baby. Maybe she just wanted the pain to stop. Maybe she thought I'd be better off without her. Clara took his hand. Or maybe she was just so tired of being afraid that she couldn't see any other way forward. She turned to face him. "But I'm not tired of being afraid, Samuel. I'm angry about it. And anger keeps you fighting when fear makes you surrender." She squeezed his hand. "I'm angry that I had to marry a stranger to save my family. I'm angry that you lied to me. I'm angry that women like Anna and my mother think their only value is in not being a burden. And I'm angry that this valley, this beautiful, brutal valley, almost convinced me I'd made a mistake coming here." Her voice strengthened. "But anger is fuel. And I'm going to use it to prove that this place doesn't have to break people. That we can build something here that lasts. That honors Anna's memory by being everything she needed and couldn't find." Samuel pulled her close, and they stood in that clearing where death had taken Anna, and chose life instead. No words. Just the wind and the cold and two people refusing to let fear write their ending. 3 days later, a telegram arrived from Silver Creek. Clara knew what it said before she opened it. She'd felt it somehow, the way you feel a storm coming before the sky darkens. "Your father passed peacefully in his sleep. Last words, tell Clara I'm proud. Tell her to live fully. Doctor says he stopped taking medicine 2 weeks ago. Said the money should go to your future, not his past. Arrangements can wait for your return. Mrs. Chen." Clara read it 3 times before the words made sense. Her father hadn't died of his illness. He'd chosen to die, chosen to stop treatment so she could have the money she'd need to establish herself here. To have a future instead of watching him cling to a past that only brought pain. She found herself in Rose's arms, then Samuel's, then sitting at the kitchen table while Hannah pressed hot tea into her hands that she couldn't drink. "I need to go back," she said. "For the funeral." We'll all go," Samuel said. "As soon as we can arrange it, but the investors. The contract signing in Denver can wait." "Samuel, can wait, Clara." His voice was firm. "Your father just died. The investors can damn well give us time to grieve." It was Margaret who came up with the compromise. "I'll go to Denver," she said. "Explain the situation. Reschedule the contract signing for 2 weeks out. That gives Clara time to bury her father and recover before facing Petton." She looked at Clara with something that might have been sympathy. "And it gives Samuel time to teach you how to review investment contracts. Because you'll need to understand every clause before you walk into that Denver meeting." They buried Patrick Brennan on a cold afternoon in Silver Creek, in the plot beside Clara's mother. The service was small, Mrs. Chen, the doctor, a handful of miners who'd known Patrick in better days. Rose and Danny stood on either side of Clara, holding her hands while the minister spoke words she didn't hear. Samuel stood slightly behind her, his presence a steady anchor. When the minister finished, Clara stepped forward and placed a handful of earth on the coffin. "You taught me to fight, Papa," she said quietly. "To choose life over surrender. To protect the people I love no matter the cost." Her voice broke. "You did that to the very end. And I promise, I won't waste the gift you gave me. I'll live fully. For both of us." Rose was sobbing. Danny's face was stone. But both of them stepped forward and added their own handfuls of earth. Then Samuel did something unexpected. He stepped forward, removed his hat, and spoke directly to the grave. "Mr. Brennan, I gave you my word I'd take care of your daughter. I haven't done it perfectly. I've lied and tested and kept distance when I should have offered truth. But I'm learning. And I promise you, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of her." He placed his hand on Clara's shoulder. "She's the strongest person I know. But you knew that already. You raised her that way." After the service, they gathered in Mrs. Chen's boarding house. Clara went to her father's room, the room Samuel had paid for, and found it exactly as Patrick had left it. Spare. Clean. Almost empty, except for a letter on the nightstand, addressed to her in her father's shaky handwriting. She opened it with trembling hands. "Dearest Clara, if you're reading this, I've made my choice. Don't grieve it. I'm not giving up, I'm letting go. There's a difference. I stopped the medicine because you need that money more than I need a few more months of pain. I've watched you sacrifice everything for me and your siblings. It's time I gave you something in return. Your mother left because she couldn't watch me die slowly. I understand that now. She wasn't weak, she was human. And she loved you more than she could express. I found a letter she wrote before she left. I'm tucking it in here. Read it when you're ready. As for you and Samuel Ashford, I watched him with you at the wedding. He looks at you the way I looked at your mother before the mines took my health. Like you're worth fighting for. Don't let him hide behind practicality. Make him fight for you. Make him love you out loud. Live fully, my brave girl. Live the life I couldn't give you. And don't you dare feel guilty for being happy. All my love, Papa." Tucked behind his letter was another, older, the paper yellowed, written in her mother's flowing script. Clara opened it with shaking hands. "My darling children, I'm not strong enough to stay. I've tried, God knows I've tried, but watching your father die by inches is killing me too. And I'm afraid if I stay, I'll resent him for leaving me. Resent you for needing me. Become someone bitter and broken instead of the mother you deserve. So I'm choosing to go while I can still love you purely. While my last memories of you are smiles instead of tears. Clara, you are the strong one. You always were. Take care of them. And when you're old enough to understand, know that I'm not abandoning you. I'm saving you from having to watch me shatter. I love you all more than breath. More than life. Which is why I have to breathe and live somewhere else. Forgive me, Mama." Clara sat on her father's bed and wept for the first time since receiving the telegram. Wept for her father's sacrifice. For her mother's pain. For the weight of being the strong one when all she wanted was to be held. Samuel found her there an hour later. Didn't ask questions. Just sat beside her and let her cry until she was empty. Then he said, "She was wrong, you know." "Your mother, about what?" "About strength, meaning you can't break. About having to choose between loving people and surviving their loss." He took her hand. "You're the strongest person I know. And you're breaking right now. Both things are true. That's what real strength looks like, not the absence of pain, but the willingness to feel it and keep going anyway." Clara leaned into him, and they sat in silence while the afternoon light faded and Mrs. Chen's boarding house settled into evening quiet. 2 weeks later, Clara walked into a Denver hotel conference room wearing a steel gray dress and carrying a leather folio that contained her notes on the Pettin investment contract. She'd spent every evening since the funeral studying contracts with Margaret, learning to spot the traps, the buried clauses, the language that sounded protective but actually gave investors control. Now she sat across from Charles Pettin and his legal team, Samuel on her right, Margaret on her left, and opened the contract to page 7. "Before we sign," she said calmly, "I need clarification on the performance metrics outlined here." Pettin's smile was patronizing. "Mrs. Ashford, those are standard industry benchmarks, standard for operations that plan to fail. These targets are achievable only under perfect conditions. One harsh winter, one equipment failure, one labor dispute. And you'd have grounds to force sale of the entire operation." She met his eyes steadily. "That's not partnership, Mr. Pettin. That's a setup." Walsh leaned forward, his expression hardening. "You're questioning our good faith. I'm questioning terms that would give you effective control while leaving us with all the liability. If your intention is genuine partnership, you'll have no objection to revising language that suggests otherwise." "This is highly irregular," Pettin said coldly. "We've presented you with a generous offer, you've presented us with a trap dressed in generosity." Clara's voice remained calm. "And I won't let my husband sign away everything his father built because we were too desperate or too trusting to read carefully." She pulled out her own sheet of revisions. "Here are our proposed changes. Modified performance metrics that account for real-world variables. Clarified operational control that preserves our authority. And," she glanced at Margaret Ashford, "additional provisions tying investor returns to worker retention and safety metrics." Pettin's face reddened. "You're trying to turn a timber operation into a charity. I'm trying to ensure your investment is sustainable." Clara leaned forward. "Workers who feel valued stay longer, work safer, produce better quality. That benefits your bottom line. Unless you're only interested in short-term profits extracted through exploitation." The room went silent, then a new voice spoke from the doorway. "I'd like to hear more about these worker provisions." Clara turned to see Governor Adams entering, along with 2 other men she didn't recognize. "Gentlemen," the governor said. "I hope I'm not interrupting. But when I heard the Ashfords were in town negotiating with the Pettin Group, I thought I'd stop by. I have an interest in how our territorial businesses treat their workforce." He moved to the table, took a chair. "Mrs. Ashford, you were saying something about sustainability." Clara felt Samuel's hand find hers under the table, a squeeze of support. She drew a breath and explained her proposal. How tying returns to retention created incentives for better housing, safer conditions, fair wages. How sustainable practices protected both profit margins and the forest itself. How treating workers with dignity was good business, not charity. The governor listened intently. When she finished, he turned to Pettin. "Mr. Pettin, I'm forming an advisory council on labor and resource management. I'd like Mrs. Ashford to serve on it. Which means your investment in Ashford Timber will be under territorial scrutiny." "I trust that won't be a problem." Pettin's jaw worked. "Of course not, Governor." "Excellent." Adams stood. "Then I'll leave you to finalize your negotiations. Mrs. Ashford, my office will be in touch about the council position." He paused at the door. "And might I say, your father would be very proud of you today. Patrick Brennan was a good man who deserved better than he got from the mining industry. I'm glad his daughter is in a position to ensure other workers are treated more fairly." After he left, Pettin glared at Clara. That was quite a performance. That was honesty backed by political support. Clara met his glare without flinching. "Now, do we revise this contract to terms that work for everyone? Or do you walk away and explain to your investors why you lost access to the best timber operation in the territory because you refused to treat workers like human beings?" It took 3 more hours of negotiation, but in the end, they signed a contract that Clara could live with. That protected Samuel's control. That built in safeguards for workers. That made the Pettin Group's returns dependent on sustainable, ethical practices. When they finally left the hotel, Clara was exhausted, but also exhilarated. Samuel pulled her into an alley between buildings, pressed her against the brick wall, and kissed her with an intensity that stole her breath. "You were magnificent," he said against her lips. "Absolutely magnificent." I was terrified. "You were fierce." "There's a difference." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright. "I came to Silver Creek looking for a practical partner. Someone who could survive. But you're not just surviving, Clara. You're thriving. You're changing things. You're making this valley, this business, better than I ever could have alone. We're doing it together, yes. Together." He kissed her again, and this time there was promise in it. Heat. The beginning of something that felt like love earning its way into being. They returned to Ashford Valley 3 days later. Rose and Danny ran out to meet the wagon, both talking over each other about everything that had happened while they were gone. Hannah had baked Clara's favorite pie. The lodge felt warm and welcoming instead of imposing. That evening, after dinner, Samuel took Clara's hand. "Walk with me." They followed the path toward the clearing where Anna had died. But this time, Samuel turned off before reaching it, leading Clara to a different spot, a meadow she hadn't seen before, where wildflowers would grow in summer. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what we build here. About what we want this valley to be." He turned to face her. "I want to marry you again. Properly this time. Not out of desperation or practicality, but because I choose you. Because I love you. Because I want everyone, including myself, to know that this marriage is real." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "You love me? I've loved you since you stood in that Denver conference room and faced down Patton without flinching. Maybe since before that. Maybe since you climbed into my wagon knowing it was a gamble but choosing courage over safety." He cupped her face in his hands. "I'm done keeping distance. Done protecting myself from loss by refusing to love. Done letting Anna's death dictate my future. When, spring. When the valley comes alive again. When we can fill this meadow with flowers and family and celebration." Clara pulled him close. "Then yes. Yes to marrying you again. Yes to building something here that's ours. Yes to loving you even though it's terrifying." They kissed in that meadow while the stars wheeled overhead and the mountains stood witness, and for the first time since arriving in Ashford Valley, Clara felt something she hadn't expected: home. The wedding took place on a warm May afternoon, 6 months after Clara had first arrived in the valley. They transformed the meadow, the one where Samuel had proposed a second time, into a celebration space. Wildflowers grew in profusion, just as Samuel had promised. Tables were set up under the pines. Hannah had cooked for days. Every worker from the timber operation attended, along with their families. Mrs. Chin came from Silver Creek. Governor Adams sent a representative. Even Catherine Harrison made the journey from Denver, leaving her much older husband behind with obvious relief. Rose and Danny stood up with them, Rose as maid of honor, Danny as best man. Both wore new clothes and expressions of cautious happiness. Margaret Ashford officiated, having secured temporary authority from the territorial government for the purpose. She'd softened over the winter, her sharp edges smoothed by watching Clara and Samuel build something real. "Do you, Samuel Jonathan Ashford," Margaret said, her voice carrying across the meadow, "take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, to honor and respect, to partner with in all things, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do. And do you, Clara Elizabeth Ashford, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, to honor and respect, to partner with in all things, for as long as you both shall live?" Clara looked at Samuel, this man who'd saved her family, tested her strength, lied to her, loved her, taught her that partnership earned through struggle was stronger than romance built on illusion. "I do. Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife." Again. Officially. For real this time, Margaret smiled, genuine warmth in her expression. "You may kiss your bride, brother." Samuel pulled Clara close and kissed her while their family and friends cheered. And when they pulled apart, both were crying and laughing at once. this was what Clara had been moving toward all along. She realized. Not the desperate escape from poverty. Not the calculated marriage of convenience. But this, genuine partnership. Earned love. A life built on mutual respect and shared purpose. She'd climbed into a stranger's wagon thinking she was sacrificing her future for her family's survival. Instead, she'd found a future worth building. A partner worth trusting. And a version of herself she'd never imagined becoming. The mountains stood guard around the valley. And inside the circle of their protection, Clara and Samuel Ashford began their real marriage, not with vows spoken in desperation, but with promises made in love, not as strangers bound by necessity, but as partners who'd chosen each other with open eyes and full hearts. 1 year later, Clara Ashford stood on the porch of the lodge one spring morning, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. The valley had changed since that first winter. Or perhaps she had changed. Perhaps both. Rose was teaching at the school they'd built for workers' children, her natural compassion finding purpose in education. Danny worked with the horses, training under Samuel's patient guidance, the anger he'd carried slowly transforming into quiet confidence. The worker housing Samuel had promised was complete, solid cabins with good stoves, enough room for families to live with dignity. Accident rates had dropped. Turnover was minimal. The Petton investment was paying dividends for everyone involved. And Clara had discovered that sometimes the most honest relationships are the ones that begin with the hardest truths. Samuel came to stand beside her, his arms settling around her shoulders with the ease of familiarity earned through months of choosing each other, not once in desperation, but daily in partnership. Thinking about Anna, he asked quietly, thinking about how valleys don't kill people. Isolation doesn't break them. Fear does. Silence does. She turned to face him. We won't make that mistake, no. We won't. He placed his hand over hers on her belly, where their child grew, a child who would be born into a valley transformed by honesty, sustained by partnership. Made warm by love that had survived winter. Are you afraid? He asked, terrified. Clara admitted. But I'm not Anna. I'm not my mother. I'm here. And I'm staying, always, always. The mountains stood guard around them, and the lodge that had once felt like a prison now felt like home, not because wealth made it comfortable, but because honesty made it safe. Clara had walked into winter expecting to freeze. Instead, she'd learned how to make her own warmth. How to demand truth. How to build something real from the ruins of deception, and in doing so, she'd become exactly who she'd needed to be all along, not a woman who survived by sacrificing herself, but a woman who thrived by refusing to accept less than she deserved. The sun rose over Ashford Valley, gilding the snow on the high peaks with gold, and two people who'd started as strangers making a desperate bargain stood together, watching, waiting, building toward a future neither had imagined but both had earned. The valley that had taken Anna in winter had given them Clara in winter too, and she had brought summer with her. Clara Ashford stood on the porch of the lodge 1 year later, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. The valley had changed since that first winter. Or perhaps she had changed. Perhaps both. Rose was teaching at the small school they'd built for workers' children. Danny worked with the horses, training under Samuel's patient guidance. Patrick had died peacefully in spring, knowing his children were safe, and Clara had discovered that sometimes the most honest relationships are the ones that begin with the hardest truths. Samuel came to stand beside her, his arms settling around her shoulders with the ease of familiarity they'd earned through months of choosing each other, not once in desperation, but daily in partnership. Thinking about Anna, he asked quietly. Thinking about how valleys don't kill people. Isolation doesn't break them. Fear does. Silence does. She turned to face him. We won't make that mistake, no. We won't. The mountains stood guard around them, and the lodge that had once felt like a prison now felt like home, not because wealth made it comfortable, but because honesty made it safe. Clara had walked into winter expecting to freeze. Instead, she'd learned how to make her own warmth. How to demand truth. How to build something real from the ruins of deception, and in doing so, she'd become exactly who she'd needed to be all along, not a woman who survived by sacrificing herself, but a woman who thrived by refusing to accept less than she deserved. The sun set over Ashford Valley, gilding the snow with gold, and two people who'd started as strangers making a desperate bargain stood together, watching, waiting, building toward a future neither had imagined but both had earned. Sometimes salvation doesn't look like rescue. Sometimes it looks like walking into the hardest winter of your life and discovering you're strong enough to bring spring with you. Thank you for being part of Clara's journey. If this story moved you, if you've ever had to choose between pride and survival, between safety and truth, hit that like button and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life. Drop a comment below. Would you have stayed in the valley? Would you have demanded the truth about Anna? Or would you have walked away? Until next time, remember, the strongest love is the one that survives winter. And the bravest choice is the one you make when walking away seems easier than staying. We'll see you in the next story.